dark history behind America's biggest banks and insurance companies. A handful of them once participated in slavery. Individuals that are owned by other people. You remember what that is. That includes Jpmorgan Chase, Citibank, Bank of America. Only a handful of companies have issued apologies for their past. But Congressman Al Green says words aren't enough, and he's demanding they make their role right in slavery. You know, I did a little research, found out Brooks Brothers even made clothes, high-end clothing for slaves. Now, that's not the type of business you're looking at. You're looking at insurance and banking institutions. Tell us about that, and why is this important?
Well, thank you very much. We're looking at insurance and banking institutions because these institutions come under the jurisdiction of the Financial Services Committee. And I'm the chairperson of the Oversight and Investigations Committee. And of course, I'm honored to serve with the Honorable Maxine Waters. She's been with me all along as we try to endeavor to find out what the connectivity is between these institutions and slavery.
No, you guys sent letters to them in June asking them specifically.
Yes, we did. And our answers were non-responsive. Some indicated that they'd done some research, but the important thing to remember is that none of them have given us an indication as to how they plan to atone. And that's what this is all about. We want to make sure that if you did have a connection, and many of them, for example, banks use slaves as collateral. People could come in and borrow money with a slave as collateral, just like you would a piece of property. And if the owner of the slave did not pay back timely and there was a foreclosure, then the bank took possession of the slaves. So it was...
so there was a time, Congressman, where banks actually had slaves.
Yes.
As property.
Banks that actually owned slaves. And the banks that we are looking at today, some of these banks were the predecessors to the current banks. So they have a connection to them. And it's that connection that causes us a lot of consternation. And we want to try to make sure that they do the right thing, as it were, that they atone for this. And one bank has tried to, but what they've done was insufficient. And let me remind people of this.
And really quick, Congressman, because we want to keep the people updated. Was that bank Jpmorgan Chase with their letter of apology to the public, a $5 million scholarship?
Yes.
And many people said that simply wasn't enough for acknowledging your past. And your two subsidiaries in the South.
Yeah, up in Louisiana.
Yeah.
Appreciate what they attempted to do, but as indicated, it's not enough. But it's important to remember this too, Isaiah. What you said is all important. But remember now, slavery was about more than forced labor. This was about kidnapping. It was about rape. It was about murder. It was about denying people language, knowledge of themselves. It was about creating a perfect victim, which is why we have found ourselves more than 240 years later, still have not in any way made the progress that we should with atonement and reparations. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to move the needle. And in so doing, I can assure you, we're getting a lot of resistance. There are people of color who are saying now that slavery was a matter of choice. And the Texas State House, they had people who were lobbying to try to get slavery defined as involuntary relocation. So it's not easy. This is tough. But one of the things that we have to remember is that these people, it was their humble hands that built the Capitol. It was their humble hands that built roads and bridges, that planted the cotton, that picked the cotton, that made America great, that sowed the seeds that fed the country. These are the people who were the foundational mothers and fathers of this country. Foundational mothers and fathers who've not gotten a recognition that they merit, which is one of the reasons why I'm going to ask for a Congressional Gold Medal for the enslaved people who helped to make America great. They deserve something more than being vilified, demeaned, and treated in a vile way. By the way, we have given a Congressional Gold Medal to the Confederate soldiers. So we ought to do the same thing for the people that those soldiers were fighting to keep in chains.
Would be only fair. Now, when we take a look at these institutions and you say atonement, would that be in the form of, and we always hate to say because it gets people jumping and sends emotions all over the place, but would it be financial reparations, scholarships like Jpmorgan Chase did, or community reinvestment? What are we looking at, or what would be an ideal form of atonement for you, Congressman?
Well, I don't know that there's one thing that would suffice, to be very honest with you. Professor Darity, who was on with us today, has a plan that would endow the traditionally Black universities, the historically Black universities, endow them so that the educations that our young people would receive would be the equivalent of what others are receiving. Give those schools an opportunity to have the money that they need to move forward with education. And that would cost a substantial amount of money, but I don't think it's too much. So that's one plan. There are other things that have been proposed in terms of community action groups receiving funds. And there are plans that have been proposed to actually have persons receive cash payments. So I'm not at a point now where I'm saying to you that there's any specific plan. With my committee, we're looking at the banks and we're looking at the insurance companies. And I have a bill that I've introduced that will require them now to give us information on their connections to slavery. And once we get that information, we want to know, well, what do you plan to do to atone for this? And we want you to give us a plan for atonement. So we're at the step one in this process. The legislation that I filed is something that I'll have to refile next year because we're obviously at the end of the year and there's very little that's going to happen. Next year, the Republicans will be in control of the House. I won't have the chairmanship of the committee, so that puts me at a disadvantage in terms of moving forward. But I do want to make sure that we get legislation filed so that we can acquire the information that we need to move forward with some atonement process. And this is separate and apart from the reparations movement that's going on. I think that that should be continued. This is separate and apart from other bills that have been filed. My committee has jurisdiction over the banks and the insurance companies, and they did, many of them, these mega banks and insurance companies have connectivity to slavery. We want to know what it is and what we can do to assure that they will give us some atonement for the history of having been engaged in this process.